Thanks so much for coming. We really appreciate you being here. Just to start, can you kind of walk us through what your post-grad years look like? You're a BC guy, went down the road to the school down there. But could you kind of walk us through your post-grad years and kind of how you started out?
I'd be happy to do that. Before I do that, though, I would like to thank Neil and Taylor for inviting me here today, and thank all you folks for showing up here. It's really an absolute pleasure for me to be back here on campus, where I really spent four of, honestly, some of the best years of my life. This is not only is this a tremendous piece of real estate, it is a tremendous community, even more so. And thank you for having me. And I want this hour to be as much about what you guys want from me, as opposed to me just spouting off stuff. So if you want to interrupt me or raise your hand, shout out a question, please feel free to do so. So I went to Boston College. I came here in 1988. Two of my sisters had gone here in the post-Flutie glow, and it was very exciting time to be here. I was an English major, which at the time was kind of encouraged if you were going to get into business, because there was this idea that if you could read and write, those are transferable skills for really anything that you were going to sort of take on as further on in your life. Well, so fast forward to freshman year, and I didn't equip myself very well academically. I was much more interested in partying than I was classes. So somewhere at some point around my junior year, sort of the light switch came on. Probably had something to do with my now wife, another BC girl who I married. But Kristen, I became more serious about my outlook on things. How does I can't just spend my life partying the whole time. It doesn't make any sense. So I became a little bit more serious. I got started going to class, getting better grades, but found myself as a young man, 22 years old, wanting to get married, having no money, being effectively broke. I don't know if there's any old timers here that remember Thomas More Hall. Thomas More Hall is now gone, but I had to take out a bunch of student loans to attend Boston College, and you have to walk down this lonely hallway. This is before, the internet and all that. You had to walk down this lonely hallway to go sign a promissory note that you're going to pay the money back for your college loan. So I found myself 22 years old. I managed to get like a 3.1, I think was my GPA when I graduated from here. I had to pay back my student loans. My parents were of modest means, and so I was so I had all these things, and I had a lot of self-imposed pressures. So, and really did not have a well thought out plan of what I wanted my career to be. But kind of fast forward to that time, and it was sort of, America was sort of we were in a recession at the time in 1992 when I graduated. So I wasn't the only one having a difficult time finding a job, and essentially I just took the first job I could get, to be perfectly honest with you. It happened to be in real estate. It happened to be in property management. Now, the good news was that property management is probably the best education you could get if you want to be in any asset class. Property management is where the friction happens, where the people who are paying the rent, we're in the business of collecting rent, and you are as close to those people as possible. So you know what they care about, you know what they'll pay more for, they know what they don't care about, and you'll also understand you'll get to really see the durability of income up close, we'll put it that way. So I took that job with a company called General Investment and Development, a Boston-based firm, great company, still friends with lots of people there. And I again, at this point I was a very serious guy. I was a very serious 22, 23-year-old guy. And I got promoted a lot. So I kept getting promoted, and I was in charge of, I was a property manager of a really large complex in a town called Jenkintown outside of Philadelphia. And the interesting thing about this, it was very complex. It had apartments, it had hotel rooms, believe it or not, it had retail, and it had office space. So it was a really really great. I mean, property managing this thing was just the best education I probably ever had. But at the time it was being sold. And so my job was to tour around all these fancy people with, $1,000 suits and good haircuts and whatever, who were talking about cap rates and discounted cash flow and sort of these concepts that I really didn't know as an English major, had no idea. And so I realized that my gap in my skill set was the technical piece. And so we moved around. At this point, I had gotten married. My wife and I lived in DC for a little bit anyway. So it was time to say, okay, I need to fill in this gap on this technical piece that I'm lacking, because I just took a bunch of English classes here at BC and other history, whatever. I got into both BC and BU, but honestly, I was very rational about it. I said, well, I already have the BC network, because as hopefully you guys all know how strong the BC network is. It is real, particularly if you're going to be in Boston. And I was living closer to BU at the time, and I figured BU it's easier. The C line is much more efficient than the B line. I swear to God, this is how I made the decision. I was on the C line, and then that's how I did it. And went to BU, and that's where I picked up all the technical skills. Those things, discounted cash flows, understanding, all the basics of finance that I didn't have. So when I look back, I think your original question was something about what I got from each one of those, I think, experiences. And so the BU thing is, it's not, I don't have, like, when BU plays BC, I root for BC. Like, there's no, I mean, it's not even and I take a moment and remember Johnny Gaudreau, but, anyway, we go to the BC BU hockey game every year, and, I hate BU. Sucks to be you. That's I'm there, but the BC experience, what that gave me was something much deeper, and I think much more long-lasting and much more important, frankly, because hopefully you're all getting it. It's not just you're not getting it. The Jesuit education is important, but it's also what this place and the kinds of people this place attracts. This place has attracted you folks, and I assume it attracted me, and it's going to attract for generations the types of people that I think value honesty, truthfulness, character, and so that's what I learned at Boston College. And I think that there are plenty of people who are smarter than I am, and there are plenty of people who work harder than I do, but I attribute most of my success to my time here at BC. So,
yeah, that's great. You just answered like 10 of my questions I had lined up. So
sorry. Okay. All right.
You're doing well.
I'll get you guys out of here quick.
well.
All right. We can go. What is it? It's only Tuesday.
You mentioned the BC network and also the BU network.
Yep.
How have you kind of leveraged the BC or BU network to your advantage over the course of your career?
Well, it's funny. I was talking to RJ. I think I see him back there before the meeting. And I've done a lot of successful deals with a guy named J.J. Connors. J.J. Connors was known to me because we went to BC together, and we would occasionally hang out at places like Mary Ann's and Father's First and all these places you guys haven't ever heard of, I guess. But J.J. called one of my colleagues out of the blue. We were in the market. We were trying to do some development deals actually in Florida. JJ called a colleague of mine. Hey, whatever. And as luck would have it, JJ had something that a deal that we wanted to do. And when you're committing to a real estate development, the trust factor is massive. It's massive because you have the developer has so much control over sort of what's being built, where the money's going. So when in a phone call of 10 minutes, I was like, J.J. Connors, Pat Ron, yeah. We made the connection, and we were off to the races. It was as if no time had elapsed. We knew where to meet each other. So I think that's the most powerful story I have about the BC network is that if you know someone here, they will act the way they when they get out into the real world, they will that'll be a person that's known to you. The BC Club, rest in peace. That was a good place. I don't know if would you guys remember the BC Club? That was a COVID casualty, but it was at 1 Federal Street, I think, and it had the Boston College Club was a good place for. I see Taylor shaking his head. Yes, you remember it. It was a good place for lunches and breakfasts and so on. That was always a comfortable and welcoming place if you wanted to network with other BC folks. But I'd say that anytime you are, and I guess as a network, from a networking standpoint, Boston College is the shorthand to a real connection. So,
yeah, that's insightful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and on that note, what really motivated you to transition from those property management roles to a industrial commercial real estate sector?
The fancy guys with $1,000 suits, they're the ones that are making all the money. That's what I saw in this business, is that it was the investment guys who were making all the money. It's fair to say that generally people in the investment roles are taking more risk. So it was, again, that was my original motivation, just being sort of crass about it. That's where, if you wanted to make a lot of money, that's where you went. And it was very difficult. I mean, it is a very difficult. I appreciate that many of you probably want to get into that side of the business, and I applaud you for it. It's very difficult. It's very competitive. Deals can go wrong that are yours, and some of the factors may not be in your control, and you'll end up having to explain why you did certain things when things go wrong. But anyway, long story short, the investment, I was drawn to it because it seemed to me the most exciting part of the real estate game.
Kind of along those lines, you speak of difficulty. What were some of the key milestones or challenges that you recall from your time at Cabot, and how did you handle them, and what did you learn?
Well, your first deal is always a challenge, and my first deal was in Oakland Park, Florida, if anybody knows where that is, Broward County. But getting your first deal done that's yours, that was a huge challenge. That was a big milestone. And then the second big milestone, I'd say, and this is the thing I learned the most about, is conducting business during a recession. And I don't know if you guys, what year are you guys born in? Like you're like 2000. Well, how old are you guys? You're
02.
02, yeah. So 02. So you would have been very young children when the GFC happened, the Great Financial Crisis, and it was sort of this thing that was spurred by overexuberance in basically the residential home market, and it sort of had this spiral of sort of nasty knock-on effects. But the deal that, speaking of J.J. Connors, I'll bring him up again. J.J. and I did a 4-building deal in Jacksonville, Florida. It was, oh God, I'm going to get some of these numbers wrong, but I think it was about, in total, maybe 550,000 square feet. And it was the pricing going into this, when we were going into this deal, was top of the market pricing. I mean, this was like rents were never higher. The port of Jacksonville was expanding. This was a great site right on, 90, a loop road outside of 95. And then the GFC happened. And, here I was, that was 2008, 9, I, married, mortgage, hadn't really made any money yet, 2 kids, man, oh man. And then at work, it was just like I'd go to work and every day they were writing the value of this asset down. Boy, that was a challenge. But once you get on the other side of that, all's well that ends well. It all turned out just fine. Fast forward to the end. But when you're conducting your professional life in really trying times, and also trying to conduct your private life and your family life, it's very, very difficult. And I think that was, and getting through that, I'd say, was probably the biggest milestone of my professional career. Just kind of getting on the other side of that and understanding, learning lessons from that, not just sort of being, well, that was terrible. What did I learn? And so it's funny. One of the things I thought I learned then is that when we hit a rough patch in the market, we're going to go and just buy all the land we can. But it's funny that the logistics market. Well, it's called logistics now, by the way, not industrial. It sounds fancier, but it does. I think it does capture the use of the buildings a little bit better when you call it logistics, because essentially these buildings that we buy at Cabot are buildings that help the supply chain move more efficiently. So whether it's closer to the producer of the good or the consumer of the good.
What are some current trends you find either concerning or exciting in your sector?
Well, so I guess that's why I'm sort of was hesitating before. Is do we want to talk about logistics or not? That's kind of where I don't want to bore everybody with logistics. If you were here and you're interested in affordable housing or apartments or office or whatever. But concerning right now is oversupply, and I can't speak to the oversupply in office, but I'm sure you probably have all heard about it. I can't speak to the oversupply in life sciences, but I'm sure you've all heard about it. We have oversupply in logistics as well, and generally speaking, we're working through it in a more measured fashion than other asset classes. The most concerning thing is that, and I think that we don't know how this office overhang is going to have an impact on the people who are players in the business, and those players would be lenders. There's a lot of equity that's going to get lost, on a lot of these deals, and how that all sort of ripples through. We really don't know yet. So I think that's kind of my biggest concern. I think that we are we're through the worst of it, at least for logistics, is the way I kind of view this. I think that a lot of people are focused on. Again, tell me if you don't want me to go here. A lot of people are focused on the 10-year Treasury. I don't know if you guys. I don't know what you guys look at when you open your phone every day. If you're looking at the 10-year T-bill, or you're looking at what this S&P 500 did, I don't know. A lot of people are focused on that. I think right now what we should all be focused on is SOFR, which I don't know if you guys, SOFR is what, LIBOR was the, SOFR replaced LIBOR, which is sort of this London interbank overnight rate, whatever. It's the short end of the curve. So it actually costs you more money to borrow money for 30 days than it does 10 years. So we have an inverted yield curve. So that's a problem, okay? An inverted yield curve, some people joke that inverted yield curves have correctly predicted, 12 of the last 5 recessions. So it's not always right, but when I travel around the country and look at what our tenants are doing, I think that this short end of the curve is having an impact. It's having an impact on how profitable tenants' businesses can be. You have to remember that money, this SOFR or LIBOR, had been essentially it wasn't zero, but it was pretty darn close to zero for a very, very long time. So people got used to operating in this environment where, hey, if inventory sits for an extra month, whatever. The carrying costs on this thing, we got our line from the bank, it's not gonna move the needle that much. Now it moves the needle. So I think that, and SOFR's been, when this inflationary period happened, I don't know, maybe 18 months ago, something like that, 12 months ago. And so the tenants that have gotten through this short-term issue and are living to fight for another day, I think that's great. And we as a, we haven't seen many bankruptcies in our tenant roster, nor have we seen many distressed sales in our asset class. I think if people read local papers here, you'll probably see some sales of some distressed office assets in and around Boston, I'm afraid. My concern is that there will be more of that. I'm hoping it's not the case, but I think that's sort of. So my concern really is other asset classes, and then getting the short end of the curve, yield curve down. That's kind of where I'm most focused on right now.
You touched on this a bit. Could you walk us through your decision-making process when evaluating potential investments?
Mm-hmm. I am always demand focused. And by that, I mean, I want to ensure, I don't care what the building is, I want to ensure that it's going to have an audience for a long period of time. That it's built, building is future-proofed, and it's, I haven't said location yet, but obviously location is the most important thing. So at Cabot, I mean, we've been in business for quite some time. We've learned a lot of lessons, and so I'll try to make this applicable for a broader, dispersion of assets. But effectively, what we focus on when we're making our investment decisions is what cities do we want to be in? We want to be in what we call the winning cities, and the winning cities that we consider are basically our coastal cities. If you're on, we're actually reducing this right now, but we'll say, I mean, it's New York. Boston is a tough logistics market because it's kind of, it's not as, it ends up being a little more high-techy than we like to be, but anyway, New York, Charlotte, Florida just in general, Atlanta, Dallas, Houston, great city, Chicago, some Midwest exposure. We're trying to limit that to sort of Columbus and Indianapolis, Los Angeles and Seattle. And then we've gone international as well. And when you look at some of the international winning cities, London, Birmingham, as they say, Birmingham in England, and then Manchester, Liverpool, sort of northwest. The Rhine-Ruhr region in Germany, which is Dusseldorf, Cologne, down to Frankfurt. There's in that MSA, there's about 14 million really wealthy consumers. And then the Netherlands is a very interesting market. There are so many constraints on land use that it's a little bit more fragmented, but almost any Dutch city is someplace we want to go be. So that, first and foremost, it's location. Where are the cities we want to be in? We want to be in cities where there is constraints on supply and where you have a cohort of wealthy consumers. Because e-commerce really has been the thing that's fueled our growth. And so we're attracted to those cities. And then the actual improvements, the buildings, the things that we're buying need to be future-proof. They need to have those things that our tenants are going to want for not just today, but for looking forward in the future for 20, 30 years. And that varies by market. I mean, if people want to go deep into this, you can ask me about specific markets, but I don't want to bore people with what all that is. But essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to find places where the income is durable. Durable income is the key to this whole thing. Because once you get vacancy in your buildings, it really, you can put it in your discounted cash flow analyses, but extended vacancy periods really hurt your total returns.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you obviously have a lot going on. Your business, your company has a lot going on. How do you handle it all? How do you describe your leadership style, and how do you foster sort of a collaborated environment?
I get back to the Jesuit ideal of people for others. I try to I try not to think of myself as having people that work for me. I try to think of how many people I work for, and so I try to approach it that we're and I deal with people, young people your age who are analysts that may have some question. I deal with, as president, I have accountants and fundraising, which is actually a crucial part of the business that I hope people are realizing that's an opportunity. If you want to get into real estate, that raising capital from institutional investors is a really rich part of our business. And dealing with property managers and dealing with all various forms of people. I like to meet people where they are and try to approach any interaction I have with somebody at our company. How can I be of service to this person? Now, sometimes being of service to a person means you have to give them some really tough feedback. You can't be afraid to do that. And I feel like I've done that in a way that I think is, I've had to fire plenty of people. I mean, it's not a pleasant thing to do, but when people, certain jobs aren't for certain people, and that's just, that's sort of a reality. So I think that I try to approach it where I'm keeping the best interest of the employees at heart. And then beyond that, I mean, as a leader, you really need to got to show up. You got to be a parent. You got to be there. You can't rely on your title. If you think you can treat someone a different way because you're higher in the pecking order, you've lost it. If that's what you're focused on, that's not going to that's not going to be the thing that's going to make you an appealing leader at an enterprise that you want to work at. There are certain places where that's the way it works, but it's not for me. So, I hope people can do whatever they want to do, right? But so that's kind of my leadership style. And it's funny because and I think the last thing that I've learned as I've gotten older is to modulate my availability. If that makes any sense. I have to deal with a lot of stuff all the time, every day. So I'm available, but when this might sound a little arrogant, but you need to be prepared when you come in and talk to somebody, at a company who's been around for a long time, who has some authority. So when I say modulate my availability, I've made it pretty clear that I don't have much time to shoot the breeze, and so I'm pretty transparent about that. I tell people, like, I don't, if you're coming in and you want my advice, fine, have that be put that on the calendar. That's what we'll do. But if you're going to come to me with a problem, you better have an opinion on what the solution should be, and maybe it's wrong. That's fine. But at least you have a well-reasoned opinion for what the solution should be. So I think that I think that that's worked pretty well for me.
And then, as a whole, just what advice would you like to leave with any young real estate professionals aspiring to enter the market, and just kind of any significant takeaways you'd want to leave with them?
Yeah, I mean, other than the sort of the touchy-feely stuff, which I guess I've already said, but you've got the BC education, you've got the BC community, you've got the BC network. Those things are important. Know who you are. I mean, I think is kind of the most important thing. Real estate's got plenty of places to go and exist and be, and there's, I was looking on the website for the Corcoran Center and noticed, there's one of the visiting professors is focused on architecture, I think, right? Did I see that? Or design or something like that? If you're a creative person, you could gravitate more towards that. If you are more organized and sort of, what's the word, but numbers focused, there's a right and there's a wrong. There's plenty of accounting and finance type jobs that are out there. If you are a risk lover, understand that ultimately, if you're going to be a good investor of people's capital, you have to have a healthy relationship with risk. And you can't fall in love with it. You can't abuse it. You got to treat it. Very, very well. So I think that. And I'm trying to think of another sort of personality type that, and I guess there's also the sales. I mean, brokerage. I mean, I think somebody said they worked at CBRE this past summer. Brokerage is sales is an important part of the business. It's what makes it go. I mean, I think that there has been talk, and maybe this will happen, and maybe it'll be your generation that'll make it happen. But there's been a lot of talk about disintermediating brokers, that you could have you could be selling or leasing commercial space via an app, where you kind of pick up your phone and say, I need 20,000 square feet in this, 4-block radius, bang, okay, done. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. So there's an aspect for people who like people, who want to interact with people. Property management is also similar to that, because you are dealing with people. You are not only, if you have a career in property management, it becomes a lot, which is a terrific career in real estate. It is a lot about managing the people that work, for you in the property management activities. So it's, I'd say that you need to really understand what gives you satisfaction. People want to be useful. You have to understand things that you do during the course of your day give you satisfaction, and then how do you find a job in real estate that applies to that. So I'd say the first step is to figure out what it is that gives you satisfaction and be authentic about it. I mean, obviously you have to, I certainly made sacrifices earlier in my career because I needed the money, I needed a job, and you guys might be faced with that. Some of you might be faced with that as well. I think that I heard who said this. It was a good thing about young people. It was if you're going to be successful in any job, really, be an incredibly hard worker and be incredibly likable. So those are two kind of characteristics that will really help you in your career. And then again, the last thing I'd say is just networking. Network. And then when you're tired of networking, network some more. And don't just limit it to BC's, thing. But if you're literally, I guess how it all works today. I don't know if the Career Center, you go to a website and you click on this, that, and the other. If your strategy is, I'm not saying not to do that, because clearly that can produce some positive results. But if your main strategy is simply to respond to ads on, I guess, LinkedIn or whatever these other places that people have jobs listed, you need to do more than that. And I'm not saying that it's pick up the phone, because I guess people don't pick up the phone anymore and call people. However you guys figure out the way to network, do that.
That's great. Thank you. I think if we're ready, we can open it up to the floor.
Hi, I'm Michael Lee. I'm a senior here at Boston College.
Hi, Michael.
And my question for you is, you mentioned expanding internationally to London and Holland. So I'm curious, what was the thought process behind going international versus staying local, where you're familiar with U.S. laws and it's already complex as it is with the different municipalities? So just curious to hear a little bit more about that.
That's a great question. It goes towards that idea of the winning cities that we've sort of come to. The question that we ask ourselves is, would you rather be in Birmingham, England, or would you rather be in Memphis, Tennessee? And the reality is that there are more, the land constraints are real in a place like Birmingham, England. You have this massive base of wealthy consumers. It's not the wealthiest city, obviously, London is, but it's so effectively we've done that, and it's a very good question. And what we've seen is that on the residual, you'll get a lot more reward for being in places where capital wants to be. And capital wants to be in these cities where they're vibrant, where there's wealthy consumers. And we're doing a lot of work. It's funny you asked this. We are doing a lot of work internally to really put more structure around that, so that we can say, okay, here, what's the P&L of our activities in a certain region? And again, I didn't touch on this at all, really, and I mentioned it earlier, but the capital raising is also kind of critical. And capital flows into the U.S. from outside of the U.S. are massive. We're actually in Tokyo. We opened up an office in Tokyo now. There are some ancillary benefits to our being, having an office in Amsterdam. We have an office in Munich now. We have an office in London, where our people can take meetings with capital who wants to be placed into this asset class. So that's kind of the one thing we want to be able to quantify what benefit that gives us. But I'd say there's two things. One is that we've found that the cities that we've picked are cities where the residual return is more assured, and they're cities where we're going to have these knock-on benefits that will help our business long term, mainly in the capital raising space.
My name's Ryan. Thanks for coming. I guess it would be helpful if maybe you could walk through like what the deal process looks like for like an industrial deal. Like you mentioned working with brokers, other stakeholders. I'd just be curious to hear about kind of the process from start to finish.
Sure. So typically the way it happens is, our people are in the markets networking like crazy. And a very typical way, that we will get a value deal is it will be off market. So it'll be a deal that a broker knows a seller who, for whatever reason, is motivated to sell. These are the best deals for us. When we have a seller who's not necessarily focused on profit maximization as their ultimate goal, but a surety of execution, that's our sweet spot. So what we do is we react very quickly. We identify a deal, and sometimes it's widely marketed. You open up your email one day and it's like, oh wow, this thing's for sale. But you identify a property. Price discovery happens, and price discovery can happen in any number of ways. But we participate in price discovery, and ultimately we arrive at a price that's comfortable. So once the deal person and the deal person is assisted by a bunch of analysts and so on. They run all the scenarios that need to go get run. They evaluate the market. Where does this building, remember I said earlier, we want to really ensure the durability of the income. What's the competitive set for this building look like? This building is 100,000 square feet. It's located at, it's off I-10 in the Inland Empire in California. What's the competitive set for something like this? And we identify what that is. We see what kind of market rents those buildings are commanding, what the rent growth has been, what other macroeconomic factors, job growth, population growth, ensuring that those things all sort of check out. And then once we have done all that analysis, and we understand that our price works based on comparable sales in the area, the rent that we've underwritten is in line with comparable lease transactions in the area, we bring it to our investment committee, of which I'm a member. And then at investment committee, the deal is presented with all these factors laid out. Investment committee then says yay or nay. If it's a yay, then immediately we go into due diligence mode. And that's really the bricks and sticks. So it's bricks and sticks and legal, So we hire engineers to check out. These buildings are, the roof is very important. These buildings are very generic. It's four walls, a flat floor, and a roof that doesn't leak. That's essentially what we're buying. So we go into due diligence on that, and the physical attributes of the building. We ensure the building's not falling down, the roof's not leaking. But we also hire lawyers to ensure that there's no crazy easements over the property. You'll go. Certain markets, I don't know, Maryland is pretty bad for this, but you'll have these crazy easements that existed back in 1830 that Anne Arundel County hasn't figured out what to do with it. So you have to clean up all that stuff. And then once all that, I'm trying to think if there's anything else in there. We interview the tenants. It's very, very important. So, the covenant or the creditworthiness of a tenant is very, very important. Sometimes it's less important if they're paying a low rent and it's a great building and we would like to get them out of there. But understanding who the tenant is, how they use the building, does the building work for them? That also is a very, very important part of what we do. Assuming that all checks all the boxes, we then immediately close. And so, our reputation is such that people know that we're not fooling around. If we shake hands on a deal on the first of the month, we're closing by the end of the month. And we can do it more quickly if you need to.
You're in the unique position of being with Cabot for 20 plus years. And with real estate being so cyclical, I'd love to hear about how you and the team of Cabot have navigated the market fluctuations over the years, whether that be GFC or the current oversupply.
It's not complicated because I'd say that, it's all complicated, I guess. But the simple number one rule that we have adhered to: don't over leverage yourself. Don't do that. Don't do that. Cash is king. Keep your equity, keep your powder dry. When you read about these big blowups, typically it's because somebody got over their skis. They took out too much debt. They refinanced and at some crazy value, took those proceeds and rather than reserving them for a rainy day. They went out and put it into another deal. So that's kind of been our the thing that has allowed our machine to keep operating through ups and downs, and then the rest of the stuff that we do. We focus on the best locations, the best buildings. We think that also is the thing that helps us be durable throughout cycles. Again, I mentioned it earlier. Vacancy is a terrible thing in the real estate business. You don't want vacancy. And I often say this to our people that I want a building that I know is going to have an audience. I may not like the rent I ultimately end up getting because the market kind of went in the tank, but if you told me that this building's going to get $10 a foot in rent, and we hit a down patch, and I end up getting 7, I feel a hell of a lot better than if you told me you were going to get 7 and it was a crappy building in a crappy location and it got 0 for 18 months. That's a much worse outcome. So I think it's don't over leverage yourself. Focus on the demand side of the equation. Is there demand for this asset that you're owning? So I think those have been the simplistic most important things.
Hi, my name's John. I have a question about zoning and
Yeah.
some of the environmental restrictions you guys have to
Yes.
face, especially in Florida, where there's a lot of issues with wetlands and trying to make sure properties aren't encroaching on that.
Yep.
What's the biggest challenge you guys have dealing with zoning, and how do you work around it?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Florida because yes, you hit the nail on the head on the challenges. Are you a Floridian?
No, I just saw, I'm familiar with the property in one of my classes we looked at that was butting up against a wetland, and they had a lot of issues with it.
Yeah, I mean, it is the wetland situation, because I see somebody back there with a Dodgers hat on. California is a hell of a lot worse than Florida. And I can get to that in a minute. But yeah, Florida has, at this point, it's a bureaucracy. It's divided up by the state. Did Swift Mud, where was the property in Florida you were talking about? Do you remember what city? It doesn't matter. Anyway, there's all these wetland credit districts that you have to work through. They're bureaucracies. I would say this: take a dim view on government intervention as it relates to real estate, and wetland regulation is you have the Army Corps of Engineers that sort of sit over the whole thing, and then in a place like Florida, and as it should. I mean, Florida basically is it's at sea level, the whole state. I mean, they have to be very careful about where water flows and where it comes to and goes to. Ultimately, our experience with wetland credits, we'll just call it wetland areas in Florida, is it's a bureaucratic permission you need to go get, and the way you go get that is you buy credits. It just costs you money. So I don't know if that was a resolution to your problem in this other Florida deal, but if you go into this deal and you got wetlands on your property, you can quote unquote mitigate that by buying credits from this bureaucracy in Florida. Now, Florida opens up the window for buying the credits, on Thursday between 1:30 and 2:30. I mean, it's a government thing. So you end up kind of it costs you more time and money. Let's put it that way. So Florida has been pretty, as far as governments can be, transparent about how you kind of do this. And the idea intuitively is appealing. I mean, essentially, okay, I'm going to disturb this wetland, which is in a, generally what we do, generally speaking, in an infill area, happens to be a standing bit of water. We're going to fill that in, and oh, by the way, we're going to go to the Everglades and buy a commensurate piece of land to ensure that area will be, and deed it to the Swift Mud or whatever one of these things is, that gets that wetland then becomes a wetland for time immemorial. Okay, so Florida and most states are kind of along those lines. It's time and it's money. If you get into a situation where you find yourself with a wetland on a piece of property that you bought, you didn't do very good due diligence, to the previous question. That's kind of something, when you go through due diligence, you're going through all your wetlands delineations, you're ensuring that your site is out of the floodplain, that your site is insurable. So California, and I'll come back to California right now, that's a state where really they are regulating these buildings to a degree that is going to have a serious economic impact on them. Are you from California or just a Dodgers fan or just like the hat? None of the above. Okay, that's fine. But California is a state that really is it's putting super constraints on supply that will absolutely have an impact. So when you ask the question about zoning, again, it's a very specific question that you asked. But there are, from municipality to municipality to municipality, that is something that you need to go get right, and you can't get it wrong. And the country in general and the world at large is putting more and more restrictions on this asset class. They don't mind the buildings themselves. What they don't like is the trucks. And you can imagine that's legitimate. So,
The market sentiments for the most part seems to be that logistics are going to be stable in the long run, and they seem bullish.
yeah.
I'm curious, from what you've seen through different market cycles, what you see as the biggest potential threat to your business over the long run.
That's a great question. I do think that regulation is going to be a big problem. Lack of available land to meet these requirements. So that's going to be that could hurt our strategy in that. Geez, that maybe people are going to have to go to Memphis, a city we don't want to go. Nothing against Memphis. I mean, it was a perfectly nice city. It just doesn't have many barriers to growth. It can kind of go on forever, and the willing municipality and so on. So that could hurt our strategy for sure, and that's one thing we do think about and try to keep on top of. If you want to get really, and you guys are probably closer to this than I am, but AI becoming a thing where inventory management is just so good that tenants need less square footage. So the conveyor systems, pick and pack systems, robots, all that stuff comes into these warehouses. And so that, and we're seeing it already. I mean, every warehouse, I was doing a warehouse tour 2 weeks ago, and everybody had conveyor systems, and it was robots, pushing things and so on, in some cases picking things. That's going to have an impact. There's no doubt about that. Autonomous trucks is something that could have actually have an impact where they need to occupy less square footage outside of a warehouse, and then somehow if there is a component of with these, FedEx, for example, has said that they want to have a fully electronic fleet of trucks. I forget what 2030 or something like that. If you have buildings that can't accommodate, if that becomes a market norm, if you don't have buildings that can provide the power to charge all these trucks, you may have an asset that's, not valuable. So those are kind of the things that when we think about sort of what and by the way, you just don't know. If you're an office guy or gal back in 2019, you're feeling great. At the fourth quarter of 2019, you're like, man, 2020 is going to be great. COVID hits. Some of the stuff you just, and the good ones are trying to work around it and figure out how to work through it. But of course, there are things out there you can't anticipate.
Thank you guys for all your questions, and thank you, Pat, for coming to talk to us today.
Thank you.